got up here.
Okay, if everybody come back in, we need to get started.
Strategic plan. I thought you were going to be presenting more.
I've got 40 minutes. I've got 40 minutes to make up.
Yeah,
That's real quick talk. That's real quick talk.
that's real quick talking, real quick talk listening.
Going back and forth, can I be seen on there or no?
I don't think any of this is on camera.
Way back.
Let me bring
It's
this
not
up.
being.
Let me bring this up.
First snippet, like
Bless her. These, okay. I just made cups of coffee, and I was like,
Okay, we're gonna get started now. I think there's a conversation back there. I saw a couple of you looking at these posters over here last night. The board did an exercise. We had a speaker come in and talk to us about what's going on. And we did a little exercise because we're getting ready to go into a strategic planning process. And this was just an exercise with our department heads and everybody else. So if it looks strange to you, it probably is because there were some good comments and some strange comments. And we were just trying to go back in history, what it was, what it is now, what do we think it's gonna look like. So later on this afternoon, the board will start getting really heavy into the strategic planning process. So just to give you an idea of what you're reading up there, because it was a fun process. So if you go back a day later and look at it, what the heck were they talking about? All right, so the next thing on the agenda is we're gonna start with our financial update with Kristen and Susan, and feel free to, with a lot of numbers, a lot of stuff in here, a lot of information, so feel free to stop if you need to and ask those questions.
Great, thank you. So I will say I tried to not have as many numbers in this year's presentation. So typically I always go over kind of our main revenue sources, our main expenditure categories. But since everyone has now been on the board for a while, you guys know our major revenues and our major expenditure categories. So I kind of took out a lot of that basic material. And I hope to have the conversation more focused on FY20's budget. So hopefully that will give you guys a good overview at the end of our presentation. A similar schedule like we've had in the past. Susan and I will both go over how we're trending for fiscal year 19, so our current fiscal year. So we are 7 months in the fiscal year. I personally like having the retreat a little later for budgeting purposes. It gives us a whole month more of actual data, and we've heard from more of our departments too at this point in the budget process. So if we can keep this schedule for future years, that would be good. That's just a plug. So like I said, we will go over how we're tracking for FY19 and how that's going to set us up for FY20. And then I'm just going to kind of give a brief overview. We did something different with this year's budget. We have multiple departmental levels in which they're entering their budget. So what we're calling it is a continuation budget versus an expansion budget. My reasoning in doing this was last year, when we started the budget process, we started a good bit in the hole, around 15 million. So, and it's just because departments entered kind of everything all in one level. So their initial operating budgets, what they needed to kind of keep service level status quo, and also any new request. So this year I kind of wanted to separate the two, so we got maybe a better idea of those initial operating budget, kind of keeping things as status quo with just the cost of doing business at this point in the year, and then anything new we're considering expansion. And so I'll go through that a little in greater detail as we go through the presentation, but I did just want to mention it because I tend to talk about continuation versus expansion. So when you hear me say that, that's what I mean. And I'll that'll lead way into the 5-year plan discussion, which I have 2 different scenarios of a continuation budget and then an expansion budget. So as we're going through, feel free to interrupt us and ask questions. And yeah.
okay, we'll get started with our current property taxes and fees. We just had the presentation by David that explained the process. So for the budget for FY 2019, we have a budget of $164,527,608. That's current property tax collections, delinquent fees, interest, all that rolled together. But we're going to focus in on the real personal and public service and the DMV numbers. So for that piece, the main property taxes, we have a projection of a total collections of $164,021,203, and that's based off 7 months of data. So that 7 months has in it your big January collections. So that's a good thing for this point in time. And so in the forecast each year, like I said, I do the real personal public service and DMV. I use the estimated year-end values obtained from the tax department, and then I have to apply the percentage collections that we actually had at the end of the last fiscal year. So for the real property, it was 98.81% of our real property levy that we were able to collect by June 30th of 2018. So that's the percentage I have to use based and apply that to the values that are provided of what they think the this year's going to end up. So for that, and then DMV is 100%, and that's because of the tax and tag. When you go get your, you pay your property taxes, it's the time you get your tax. So that's why we use 100% of that. So at this point in time, we're anticipating an excess of $1.2 million. Last year, it was $3 million at June 30th. So I don't know if we maybe did a better budgeting this year, or we might have a lot of discoveries in between now and the end of the year that we may come in more than that. Property taxes historically have come in over budget each year, and a lot of that's due to using that percentage. You can only use a percentage that the tax collection from the previous year applied to your values. However, we have discoveries, but we also have abatements, and we'll talk about another screen. So those can fluctuate from year to year, so that throws off our collections when we're trying to estimate what we think the year is going to end up. So at this point in time, with 7 months of data, we think that property taxes will come in about $1.2 million over budget for FY19.
Susan, the percentage that you're using there was
98.81.
And that was 2017 or
It's
2000?
June 30th, 2018.
18.
That is the amount that we actually publicized in our CAFR also.
Is that typical? Was that a typical year, higher,
It
lower?
is, we had, it's just a little bit less than the previous year, not by much. So it was about 0.15% lower. So at June 30th of 17, we were 98.96. And then at June 30th, 18, we were, like I said, 98.81. So that's down just slightly, 0.15%.
Okay.
Still in the same ballpark. And as we just spoke about, the just give you an idea for after 6 months, because we have gotten the collections in for January. We have not completely finished our levy calculations and stuff like that. We will probably in the next week or two finish up our January reporting. So we just went back and looked at the 6 months of real property discoveries and abatements, and that's what this slide shows you. It shows you that for the real property, for the discoveries, we had 98.1 million value added, not levy, value. At this point in time last year, it was 69.5. And then also the abatements are 38 million versus 62.1 at this time last year. And I spoke with David in the tax department, and both the discoveries and abatements can fluctuate from year to year. However, we sort of zoned in and said, what really affects us is, hey, are we going to have any large abatements? Does he know, coming down the pipeline, do you know of any large abatements that might hit us between now and the end of the year? And right now, he does not anticipate any large ones. We'll have some that come on and go. But also, if you'll remember, at year end, we'll have a fund balance assignment just in case we have to come back and settle some appeals or something. The tax department will give me an estimate of how much I need to put in my fund balance to set aside, and it wasn't that much this year, so we're not anticipating any large abatements at this time.
Can I ask you a question
Yes,
on
ma'am.
that? The Alevo Philip Morris property, where is that in this 38 million, the idea that they're going to bulldoze it and have raw land, or where will
Defer that
where
to
will we
David.
see that impact in our valuations and then our taxes collected? Thank you.
So for this tax year, the demolition of that project didn't start until after January 1st. So there shouldn't be an effect on the valuation for this tax year. Property is valued as it is January 1st of each year. So those changes to the property will be addressed in the by next January as part of the revaluation. So that effect will be realized next year.
Other questions about property taxes? And again, at the top of the screen, you'll see the original valuation for 19 was the 22.875 that we spoke about earlier. And then for the new year, we'll go into the projections on a couple of slides over.
So it's a net 60 gain, whereas last year it was only a gain of 7. Am I reading that right? We're in the discoveries, we added 98, but you have to pull out 38.
Yes.
Right?
That's-
Last year, you had 69, you pull out 62.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some years that, it'll be the opposite. We can go back historically, it just depends on the discoveries or people,
David looks like
Settlements
he
and
wants to
stuff.
make a comment about that. Am I not reading that or thinking about that correctly, or?
No, that's correct, and that's tied, the 98.1 is tied to a couple of large additions from a discovery standpoint in corrections from a personal property valuation standpoint for some companies. They made corrections which increased the value over our projected budget numbers, which was a little out of the norm. If you can consider a norm, these numbers are not necessarily consistent year to year. Just depends on activity that goes on. So it's not typically something you would look at from a trend perspective because it's all based on individual valuations.
Susan, on the assigned fund balance,
yes.
can you explain a little bit more about that? I mean, you was pretty vague on that. but
Okay.
What I mean is, it's obviously a reoccurring expense. Is that based on what the tax office tells us?
Yes.
All right, hypothetically, it's $1 million set aside. We use 300,000 of that for abatements or whatever. Do we put the 300,000 back and maintain $1 million? Or can you explain that?
Okay. We've been very fortunate in the past. We have set aside money through the years for those situations where we might need to tap into those reserves, but we've always been able to cover it in our budget, where we'll have like discoveries and the revenues coming in over budget. So we don't want to tap into our fund balance unless we need to. So like last year, if we had the $3 million in excess of over our budget for property taxes, if we would have had some large settlements to pay out, we would have used that money instead of tapping into the fund balance. That's just like a insurance place to put aside, but it would be not prudent if I didn't put back some money for the assignments. And so we also speak to our attorney. If there's any lawsuits that he knows about, we can set aside money for that. All those calculations are set aside in fund balance before we ever talk about transferring for our 15% fund balance transfer to our capital reserve so we can use it for one-time projects. All that money is set aside for those what-if situations so that we're prepared for the future.
And that's great. We don't want, obviously, to set aside money on a lot of speculation, but you do have to speculate some based on facts, based on
Yes.
things that you do have. But I'm hoping, though, that we can, and I've said this in prior budget meetings, and that is for us to use every dollar we can because the need is so great in so many areas. And if you've got so much money tied up in fund balance, so much money tied up for this and for that and for all the other might-be's or speculative type things, then that's obviously less money that we can budget for the things that we really need to, try to cover if we can. So,
Yes.
and that's just my point of view.
Sure. I think what Susan's, that these assignments are issues that we know are out there, and there is a potential liability that we're going to have to cover during that year, whether it's a lawsuit or something like that. If the lawsuit doesn't, whichever way the decision goes or whatever the process is, we may have to pay out a portion of it, we have to pay out all of it. We're just trying to guess what that number is so that we can cover it without impacting the fund balance or going into an emergency fund. If it doesn't come to fruition, and if it's less, much less, then yeah, it'll go back into where it's available for you to spend.
And just because if, like your $1 million example, if I had $1 million for tax settlements one year, and I speak with the tax department the next year when it comes time to do it, and they only tell me I only need 500,000, I'm not going to keep that $1 million. We reevaluate it every year during the time when we're doing our fund balance calculation.
good, and I think that's extremely smart budgeting. You know, really, I think, you know, of course, you've done an excellent job, and there's been times, you know, that we're glad we did have money set aside for instances that have occurred. And so it's better to be prepared than have an emergency or something and there's nothing there. Where do we pull money from? So.
Okay. So, as in the past, we've told you that property taxes are number one, our largest revenue source. Sales taxes are number two. So if we lead into that, we have, just a recap from previous years, and most of you probably know this already, but our sales tax arrives around the 15th of each month, and we're 2 months behind. So typically at our retreat in January, we only have 5 months, and we're asked to project out the remaining 7 months. This year, we've got 6 months coming in. Last year, at this point, it was looking doom and gloom because we had had several refunds hit our account. This year, the refunds we've had some large refund months, but not to the degree of last year. So at this point in time, when I'm looking at the sales tax, based on the growth that we've seen, and then I estimate how much we're going to receive in refund hits, I still think this year we're going to come in at 1.5 million over budget right now. Of course, we look at this every month. So like I said, we do anticipate some larger refunds prior to the end of the year. And we usually get the information towards the end of the month, so the money that will be coming in March 15th, probably next week or within the first couple of days of March, we'll get the information about what's going to hit on the 15th of the month. So they are giving us a little bit more timely information. Before, we used to have to wait till the money showed up on our account before we could get any information. Past 2 years, it's been nice to have that 15 days earlier so we can start projecting and looking at our sales tax. But so far, we budgeted a 1% increase from our actuals of 18. So I'm hoping that will stay on course and we'll still be able to realize a $1.5 million over budget for this fiscal year that we're in right now.
Susan, in this context, what is a refund?
Okay, the refund is, everybody has to pay into the state of North Carolina their sales tax, so 7%. So the nonprofits, some of them larger ones being like the hospitals that usually we could get a hit from them, they can apply for a refund of their sales tax twice a year with the larger ones. So if you're seeing all these nice construction projects going on at the hospitals and stuff like that, then we can anticipate larger sales tax refunds coming out of our pot of money. So what, if, you know, like you said, the state, they collect the 7%, and then the county and the municipalities get back the 2.5%. And then so that's distributed from the state. So we have to pay it in, and then we get our refund back. Also, the nonprofits get theirs back. So when it's time for the nonprofits to be paid their sales tax refund, it comes out of our pot of money with the month it was paid out. So 1 month I might receive $4 million, and the next month it might be 2.7, and then the next month it might be 3, or it just goes up and down.
Is there a deadline for them to request those refunds?
We have a deadline for ourselves for December 31st, because we do ours annually for the county. I'm assuming that it is a twice a year with a deadline, but the state can refund whenever they want to. It's like we submitted ours on last part of December. Sometimes we've received it in March. Sometimes we receive our refund end of May. So it can fluctuate. So if they're doing the same thing for the people who are applying twice a year, one year, and I don't know if you remember, I was telling you this, one year the state was holding back on their refunds. And so we had wonderful sales tax revenues because we didn't get hit with refunds, but save for one of the 2 refund periods for like a hospital, the next year we got hit with 3. Well, it makes it hard when you're budgeting. You're thinking, oh, we're doing great, we're going to budget the same next year. And then we got hit with those 3 large sales tax refund periods. The state maybe needed the money for cash flow, I don't know, whatever. We're at their mercy.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation going on now with the counties association and the state legislature is if you're tax exempt, if you're sales tax exempt, then don't collect it. Instead of, because right now, everybody, the nonprofits or the non-exempts have to pay it and then they refund it back. So there's a lot of administrative work that goes on with that. There's a lot of uncertainty created in us as we try to project budgets. So if you just don't pay it, then we know what we get is what we get instead of going back. So it's still conversation right now. We know the state needs that money, and they hold it for at least 2 or 3 months, and sometimes more when they have to, but for cash flow purposes. But we would like for them to consider that, because while it helps them, it creates issues for us and problems in projecting revenues, so.
I think every conversation that I've been involved in along those lines is, the response has been, that's not likely to ever happen, because the state likes to use that money for that period of time. I think we should continue to talk with our representatives about it, though, because it does create quite a dilemma for us.
Yes. And on the earlier slide, I remember me telling you that property taxes came in $3 million over budget last year. Well, sales tax came in 1.1 under budget. So that they sort of not completely wash out, but it's nice in a year where both of them are over budget, but it's so hard to predict, because at the retreat last year, I was saying, oh, it's not, the state's saying that everybody's growing, but Cabarrus County's not because of those refunds. So at that point in time, we said we're gonna be $1 million under budget. Well, it's off. So it was 1.1 under budget. That's how it ended up the year. So it hurts. But right now, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say we're gonna come in at 1.5 over. So we'll see what that has each month goes by how that turns out.
You're using 1% of your budget projections for next year, but we feel pretty comfortable we may be able to bump that up a little bit. We'll see, based on our collections for the next couple
I
of years.
remember the month where we hadn't had food and beverage tax. We got hit so hard, we weren't looking at anything, and you didn't have any advance notice on that one.
Nope. We thought they had made a mistake.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a huge one, and then, of course, if they change sales tax, I mean, we collect a lot in Cabarrus County because of our retail.
Yes.
But then the redistribution across the state, we get hit with that too, so. I like the fact that on sales tax projections that you're extremely conservative. I would rather you be very conservative and come in $1.5 million over budget than to bump that out to, I forgot where it is in here, that, we're somewhere in here, because I did read ahead. 'Cause I was feeling so great yesterday as I am today, so I read ahead a little bit.
Yes, we're good.
But somewhere in there, the state said we did 1% and they said you should do 3 or something like that. I would defer to your expertise anytime on something like that. I would much rather you be overly conservative and come in with some extra money than we use for one-time projects than you sweating it every month, worrying, and then flip side of that, worrying us that we might come up short on
Yes.
something. Pam's wanting to weigh in on that, I can tell.
What I would like to weigh in on that is, I've seen the work that Susan's done, and if you could go back through the analysis, I'm gonna say 5 to 7 years, and she always tells you about the refunds, and they're up and they're down. But she's got detail that I have never seen in a finance office or conversations that have been had at conferences to exactly the months of the refunds coming in, the patterns that are coming in, and I think she's actually came to a point to develop a pattern, but like she referred to in the back, the new Department of Revenue gentleman that was probably 3 or 4 years ago, who came on board and said, I'm cleaning up this whole mess. And that was the year we all paid the price because he cleaned up the mess. And I think he's done a pretty decent job of keeping it in line, but if you watched and go through the spreadsheets that she has, you will see, I would love to say a pattern, but you will see something on the lines of understanding a little bit better about the refunds and kind of having a pattern of every other year kind of goes one way or the other way, but most of the finance people are using the state projections, and I'm not sure how they're coming out at the end of the year, but like you said, being $1.5 million over, we can use that for one-time projects and not issue debt, so there should not be a negative to be put aside to that, but I would like to commend her on that work if
Thank
you
you.
really want to go see some fascinating analysis. It's pretty detailed.
So, yeah, historically, the state is way up here, and I don't remember ever in the last 15 or 20 years that we've ever tried to match the state. It's always been very conservative, so.
And y'all do a phenomenal job. You're
Thank you.
100% correct. It gives, I don't know, this is 11 budgets, I guess, for me now here, and then the years before that of sitting in the peanut gallery. But you've worked very hard to try to take a process that's constantly moving with a whole lot of potential pitfalls to come up with validity. And again, I really appreciate everything y'all do, and I feel very comfortable when you present the budget to us and these meetings and everything else, that you have done all the due diligence, and you really have tried to find those needles in a haystack to make sure that we're not getting in a really bad situation here.
Thank you.
So, thank you for everything.
You're welcome. We can, once a year, with Mr. Morris's signature, or the chairman's signature, ask for our refunds of things greater than $1,000 paid out. It's very interesting to see those things, but that's after the fact. But I guess I could look at that and see that there's been two times during the year where 2 big refunds have been paid out to our hospitals. And if I only see one, I know that this coming year, we're going to hit with 3. But in the past couple of years, it's been pretty consistent with the two times a year. But like Pam indicated too, that it does seem to be following a pattern of every other year. So this is the good year. So if on 19, so next year might not be as good, but because it can vary. Like right now, of an 8-year average, we've had like 10.6% of our revenues are paid out in refunds. That hurts. But some years have been, like this year so far, we're experiencing 8.9. So I'm thinking, well, if it's an average year, I need to bump up my reduction, so I make sure that if we have a 10.6. But some of the years have been as high as 16.8%. And that may have been that year that we hit 3 times. But anyway, any more questions on sales?
Chairman Morris is exactly correct. It's not changing, but I mean, I guess what do we call that, the meeting in a box? That
Right.
maybe we just, somehow, if it's not going away, at least the data or the information can flow so that it doesn't just leave you stranded trying to guess. And I guess we've talked about it before, and that probably won't go anywhere either, but at least, because like we've talked about, the hospital has no obligation at all, even if we reach out to them to provide us information. And that it would just help immensely if they could, figure out a way to at least get the information to flow our direction.
While we're on sales tax, this is probably a question for you, Mike. It won't affect us this year, obviously, for this year's budget, but have you heard any of the conversations or where it's going with the quarter-cent flexibility sales tax? I mean, Paul tried to get that done last year.
Last year, I think there were concerns with the election year. And this is not an election year coming up, but I think some of those same concerns are still out there, so we'll see. The school bond, you see, there's 2 options now. There's a House version and now a Senate version. I think one of those may happen this year. Which one, we don't know. There's pros and cons to both. The sales tax, I think there's still some hesitancy right now from what we're hearing behind the scenes, but we'll see. I mean, we're going to continue to advocate as much as we can, but I think there's still some hesitancy at the state level as to do they want to bring that forth or not. So we'll keep you posted on that. But
Well, that would just pertain to Cabarrus County anyway, wouldn't it? I mean,
that's the biggest thing. All we are is asking for flexibility. You still have to have the local referendum, so we're not quite sure. From our level, we're not quite sure what the hesitancy is, but because we're not the only ones. There's others that are needing that too.
For what it's worth, I talked to Representative Sasser on Thursday, and he said he was very supportive of that for us. So,
Yeah, I'm not saying our local legislators
Yeah.
will be opposed. I think it's more the
Right.
collectives that are still a
Bigger
little hesitant
picture.
right now. No,
Well-
I think our local legislators have been very supportive.
Well, I know that you want to, there's a good time and a better time to bring something like that, I know, to the legislators. But I think that's something that we need to keep pushing forward, though, because that could increase our sales tax revenue considerably.
Right.
Which would give us, obviously, more revenue to do more, and therefore, the bottom line, keep the taxpayers' tax rate lower. And that's what I'm all about.
Well, I know from the staff's perspective, I know from your level as well, and the State Association of Counties, it's one of their goals for that flexibility in revenue. So
I think one of the things that probably we're going to have discussions about going forward is that is currently authorized for transportation purposes, and we're asking for the flexibility to use it for school. Based on the preliminary reports that I've heard on the transportation study that's due to come out later this year, when we see that, we may say, oh, wow, we're going to need it there, so, but I still think we should push, like you said, for that flexibility. And also to continue to point out that it is not a decision that we would make, it's a decision that the taxpayers would make, they would vote on it.
And even if that, if they did give us flexibility, and if we found out that we needed the money in transportation, 50% is better than 0%.
Exactly.
If you had to split it between transportation and other areas that we need.
You are right on
funds.
target, so that flexibility is still extremely important.
So you heard from Susan on two of our obviously biggest and most major revenue sources. I work with our assistant finance director and the respective department heads for Register of Deeds, building inspections, and ambulance fees to help project their revenue sources and how we're predicting them to come in for FY19. So again, it was helpful to have kind of an extra month of actual data to go off of. So what we did is we looked at how we were trending at this point in the fiscal year, and then took out any anomalies or exceptions, and then of course prorated that out for the remainder of the year. So for our Register of Deeds department, their budget for FY19 is $2.7 million, and we are anticipating to come around 7.6% over budget, which would equate to around $211,000. For our building inspections department, they have a $3.8 million budget. At this point in the fiscal year, they are under budget. And I think a lot of that could be due to weather delays, but you normally see an uptick in the spring months for inspections. So I worked with Kelly Sifford, and we feel comfortable that they will make budget this year. But again, at this point, typically, we've always been trending a little better at this point in the fiscal year than we have this year, and we are attributing to some of that just due to weather. And then ambulance fees have a $5.7 million budget, and they are expected to come in around 3% over budget, which would be around $154,000. Any questions on the major fees? So this slide just kind of goes over just the highlights of what Susan and I just talked about, so you can kind of see how we're trending at this point in the fiscal year. So I'm not going to read, over all of those totals again, but just adding those all up, it's looking like we're expected in our major revenue category to come in $3 million over budget based on the 7-month mark, which is good. This kind of data helps us budget better for FY20, and things are looking more promising, of course, on the sales tax side for FY20's budget. So I did just want to touch briefly on, so we talked about how our revenues are coming in. Personnel-wise, we're projecting lap salary to come in around $1.1 million. I believe when I reported this last year at this time, we were around 1.3. So we have come down a little on our lap salary. Lap salary is just due to turnover in all of our departments. So our biggest departments that we see a lot of vacancies and turnover in is obviously our sheriff's department and DHS, because they're two of our largest departments. But we do have a recruiter in our HR department that has helped work with these departments in getting a good employee in a job, a good fit, and retaining that employee. So it has helped reduce the amount of lap salary. And also, I did kind of want to note, last year, since the budget was tight, we did not budget for merits. So employees still got merits based on their performance, but we proposed to fund that using lap salary. So that could play into why you're not seeing as much lap salary this year as we have in the past. We always try to make efforts to reduce that, obviously.
I think one of the biggest areas where it was the Sheriff's Department, and Sheriff Shaw now is in our conversation says that they are doing very well with their recruiting process, so they're getting staff back up. As far as patrol, I think that's pretty accurate there, so then next we'll start working on detention officers, right? But we are making some good headway there to getting the patrolmen back out on the street, so that you're seeing some of that going down now, so.
So typically, I give you guys a high-level overview of the budget calendar. So obviously, we're at the retreat, where we go over the current fiscal year and then what we're kind of anticipating for the upcoming budget year. The whole month of March is where we meet with each individual department and really go line item by line item through the department's budget. So this year, we will go over that continuation budget, which I'll explain a little more, I believe, in the next slide. And then we'll also go over their expansion budget, so those new kind of requests that they're asking for. The months of really April and May, I always joke that it's more of the behind-the-scenes work. You don't really see us that much, but we're working to balance the budget and then compile that hefty 400-page book with the help of Lauren Tayara that we normally distribute out, which is the preliminary budget. And then on May 20th is where we will present the budget to the board. And in May 28th and 30th is where we really dive into FY20's budget. You'll hear just kind of the key highlights and overview, maybe personnel requests that make up the budget. And you also hear from our school systems, fire districts, all of our outside agencies. And then hopefully by June 17th, the budget will be adopted. So recommended for adoption. Any questions on the timeline? We kind of caught up, so typically, with the retreat being in January, our departments are still keying a lot of their budgets, and we really don't have a good idea of how the budget's shaping out. But with it being a month later, the departments have already keyed their continuation, their kind of operating status quo budget, and so they actually finished keying their expansion budgets. That is due Monday, so they're probably keying as we speak. And so hopefully it'll kind of give us a better idea of how we're trending this year, just kind of based on, we just have more data at this point.
I think one of the things that always concerns me a little bit, it's kind of like comments I make about our consent agenda regularly, is when we get down to that June 17th date to adopt the budget, I feel a little, sometimes like the public looks at that and says, they just very flippantly
Sure.
did that and there wasn't a lot of comment or discussion or questions. And sometimes I'm concerned that they don't realize all that has occurred prior to that and how many times we've talked about it and how many times it's been analyzed and those kind of things. So I think it's good for us to talk about that with the public and say, this is not something we just came into a meeting and took a look at today and approved. It's something that's been in process for many months.
Sure. Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. It's a very long process that takes, it's a team effort from staff's point of view, departments. I've worked with communications, and we normally have a Government 101 session that takes place in early June, so the public can come out and hear about the upcoming budget, voice any of their concerns or praises that they might like. So that typically takes place before the public hearing, and I think Kasha is actually working on doing a few extra Government 101 sessions this year, so maybe one during the day, but for those that can't make it during the day, having a night session, and then maybe one at a different location too. So hopefully with all of that.
And I applaud that effort because having participated in one of those last year, I know one, maybe two of the people that took that class then were the public
Right.
speakers at our budget when we approved the budget.
Yeah, so it's always great to have the public input and to have them informed on the upcoming budget.
Kristen,
Sure.
just sort of to clarify for my own self, and for those, if this gets out, I don't know if it gets out. I know David's got us recorded and everything. But whenever the various departments send their budget request in, whether it be continuation and/or expansion, we surely have somebody, maybe several people, that review those requests and say, yeah, you need this, no, you don't need that. Who does that? And how many times is that? I mean, sometimes the viewing public or the newspaper puts out, those commissioners disapprove this and disapprove that, and help us understand that a little bit.
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. So I think the best answer is multiple people are reviewing that. So for instance, those departments have already submitted their continuation budgets, and Lauren Tiara and myself have already gone through line item by line item, just reviewing that. So really what we're looking for, if anything looks off, if a department maybe forgot to budget for something, if there's a substantial increase, it could be a miskeying, it could be that that increase needs to be in that expansion budget level because it's tied to something new. So we're trying to get, separate out that status quo, what you need to maintain current service levels, and then anything new. And then really departmental staff are reviewing it, and also during the whole month of March is where finance, budget, county management, and all of the departments come through, and we look line item by line item, and we go through each department's budget with their staff, with their program managers and department heads, and then after that, we then review it again and make any necessary adjustments. So this year might be a little challenging because we do have multiple levels, so it could be a lot more back and forth, but I think it'll be good. I think it'll help the departments understand, what they need to kind of maintain their own service levels in their departments and how to kind of really get a true operating budget or continuation budget, and then versus any of those new requests. So this year will kind of be, I've explained to our departments, it's a learning year. Some departments are easier to budget for continuation-wise than others. I know, Kyle in infrastructure and asset management, if you have a department that are, budgeting based on projects, the projects are going to change year over year. So it's going to be hard to budget for stuff like that. And when you're a department that supports other departments, you're kind of at the mercy of what that department's requesting for the year. So, so I guess that was a really long explanation, but there's multiple review processes that goes into place.
Well, I actually figured that, obviously, because, we got a lot of different departments, and if they all had an expansion budget, then whatever we budget, obviously, it's going to have a major impact on it.
Sure.
And in some cases, we be like we were last year, $15 million short.
Right.
And so that helps prevent that type
Right.
thing in the very upfront. But I think all in all, as far as myself, I can feel very comfortable after it's gone through all of the departments and all the different levels of finance and county administration, that by the time the budget gets to us, that it's pretty doggone clean. Because yourself, guys, we've had in the past commissioners that wanted to go line by line by line and audit what they thought, and just totally bypass what you guys did months and months of work on. And so I, for myself, feel very comfortable that when you bring us something, it's pretty doggone accurate. It may, I'd rather for us to be over budget at the end of the year, so we do have a little excess money. But I don't want to see us with substantial amount of money, multiple millions and millions of dollars, because we need to be using that.
Sure.
So, and that's just been my theory all along, is we need to try to use every dollar we can during the year, but yet be conservative enough that we'll have some it's like a taxpayer. When he files his tax return, they all look for a tax refund. But they, in all honesty, would probably rather use that money during the year for their everyday needs.
Right.
But at the end of the year, they still look for that little tiny bit of tax refund, hopefully. And that's the same with the county.
Yeah. The process actually starts in October for our department heads on their capital improvements. If there's anything there, then they have to meet with the IT department and with our IMES department to go over it. So what are the actual costs of the project, are there any other operational costs or current or future expenses that go with it? And those two departments look at it, evaluate it, okay, does it make sense for one? And then what is the cost, and can they implement it during that fiscal year? If they can't, there's really no reason to budget it. If we got 30 projects in 1 year and you can only get to 15, then why budget them? You push them out or you don't. So that part of the process, then Kristen and Lauren get involved, and then the rest, Susan and Pam and Jonathan and I are constantly vetting these requests. There's a lot of, and you'll see today, that continuation budget is there. We've not fully vetted that yet, so you're seeing it at a point in time. So we'll continue on. So, and then we're also looking at programs and services. Are they still functioning where they need to be? Are they doing what we want them to do? And if not, are we going to continue them? Are we going to replace them with something else? Or are we just going to move on? So there's a lot of vetting going on right now. First in the departments before they even submit it to us and to Kristen. But so it's a long process. It starts in October of the previous year, and it doesn't end until June of the following year. So you're 9 months or so of the year. We're somewhere in that budget process.
Well, excellent explanation from Kristen and from you, Mike. And I just wanted this, like I say, if this does get out to the viewing audience, then it will help them better understand that we're not just rubber stamping things. It's been vetted many times and observed to make sure that we're making the best use of every dollar that the county's entrusted with.
And at the end, if there is money over, your policy is that you move it into the capital improvement, and so it's going to go. It allows you and us the ability to pay cash for projects that we would typically have to borrow for. So it's not just going into a savings account and sitting there. It's still being used, and it allows us to do that on some projects. So.
I would add, I agree with everything that you said, and one of the other luxuries that we have here in Cabarrus County that I think some smaller counties don't have, and I look when you see in the news about different problematic issues that have occurred in other parts of the state, and I always look at that and say, how could that have happened? Could that ever happen here? And I think usually that those problem issues occur in smaller counties that don't have a larger number of staff. When you look at the process that we engage in here in Cabarrus County, there are so many different hands that touch it and so many different people involved at all different levels that it's not, if one person got off track, there are a lot of other people to make sure they get back on track. Not that happens, but that potential is always there. So I think that adds a lot to my comfort level that we know we're getting accurate information and good decisions.
Thanks, everyone. So again, just kind of hitting the highlights since we've already talked about it a good bit. So new this year is that continuation and expansion budget for our departments. So what Susan and I will kind of go over in the next slides and kind of getting into explaining the 5-year plan, you're seeing that continuation budget that the departments have entered. It is in our financial software system, but like Mike said, we haven't met to gone through and really vetted the request. But how the continuation budget worked this year is the departments had as a base point their adopted budget from last year. So all of their itemized detail that they provided, which actually made us really popular, that they didn't have to rekey some of those requests this year. But with that being said, they still needed to modify and assess those requests. So just because they got it last year, they may have budgeted for a conference or for a project that they don't typically have recurring year over year. So they needed to update and modify those requests. And then just update them just based on what's the cost of doing business now. Some of these costs probably have increased from last year at this time to this year at this time. So you will see some reductions in the continuation budget, but you'll also see some increases. And what we tried to explain is just because there was an increase didn't necessarily mean it was totally an expansion item, because it's not really new. It's just the cost increased with just doing business. And then what we classified as an expansion request for our departments, just to kind of keep it as easy as possible, since this was a new year of us kind of approaching 2 different levels, was just any new request tied to new personnel. So if department's asking for a new position, that position's gonna need new software, maybe a new vehicle, a new workspace, new upgrades to an existing program, or changing the scope of an initial program. We classified that all as an expansion request. I do want to note that not every department will have an expansion request or an expansion budget. And then we did note that anything new must align with your 4 countywide goals that you currently have. I know we're revisiting those with the strategic plan, but just to make sure we're kind of in line with the bigger picture and the initiatives set by the board. So that kind of is a high-level overview of the different levels at this point.
Kristen, just one last question.
Sure.
And we move on from expansion. But typically, when the departments do submit their budgets, do they indicate some way that this is something irregular from last year, whether it be an increase or a decrease, which will make your job easier, or do you have to look for it?
So I would say it's probably 50-50. Last year, when it was kind of all in one level, it was harder to kind of pick out what they needed just to continue operations, and then what was kind of a new request that is an anomaly that you may not see every year. So our departments do really good at budgeting, and if you see an increase, they'll normally note that increase. If it's due to, an extenuating circumstance, they'll note that in their itemized budget entry. But I think last year, what made kind of the budget process a little more difficult is because all of it was entered in one level, and we had to do kind of a first level review of kind of vetting out, since sales tax wasn't trending as well as we would have liked last year at this point, what did these departments really need to keep their service levels maintained, and then what could they potentially do without for another year, just depending on, how we were tracking. So I would say it's a bit of both, but by separating it out in different levels this year, it's definitely helped us out, so. So I'll just briefly go over just the 5-year plan. I know you all are familiar with how it's set up, but just as a reminder, and everyone should have copies at their workstation, so it's the largest piece of paper. So what you'll see is I typically start with the 2019 budget just to serve as a reference point. And as you know, the 5-year plan is projecting out 5 years, and what you're seeing in the individual columns are increases or decreases over the prior year's budget. So if you're seeing an amount of, growth in sales tax of $6 million, obviously we get more than that in or property taxes, but that's the additional revenue that we can expect to receive. So with the 5-year plan, I do want to note that I did keep the tax rate flat at our 72 cent for the 5 years out. And you will see that continuation budget in that first kind of column. And then the second column, then the third column is going to be the expansion budget. So as Susan and I go through our next slides, we're really just focused on continuation at this point. And then we'll touch on expansion and any highlights we kind of know kind of this early in the process. So I will say that we also do have what our calculated growth rates we use to project our revenues, which we'll go into further detail on, noted out beside all of our major revenue sources, so you can follow along there. So we'll start at the top with our revenues, and then we'll work our way down with our expenditures that we know of at this time. Any questions on the 5-year plan, how it's set up? Okay.
So with the property taxes for FY20, again, we're using the 72 cents per 100 valuation. And our projected growth for property taxes is 3.8%. So that equates to the 6 million that's on the 6.1 that's on their 5-year plan. This growth is looking at what we budgeted in FY19 was what we're budgeting in 20, not necessarily what we're going to come in 19, but this is budget to budget. So that's the 3.8% increase in our budget. And again, we have to use our required tax collection rate of 98.81 for real property and 100% for our DMV, which sometimes we call registered motor vehicles also. So the valuation projected is to equal $23,773,500,000. So that's the amount that we're using for our valuation for the FY '20 year. Any questions on property tax? Okay. We'll switch over to the sales tax, and some of this we've already discussed on a previous slide, but it is trending better than last year. Then what we used a 1% growth for our FY '20 and future years. So at this point in time, just a 1% growth. As the months go on, we might be able to squeeze out another %. But usually North Carolina, they will recommend for us to use 3 to 5% growth, which we spoke about earlier, that we can't do that with Cabarrus County, not with our refunds. And we do anticipate some larger reductions during the next few months for our local hospital construction projects that should hit in the last 6 months of the year. And like again, refunds can drastically change our revenues, and we'll continue to revisit it every month. We spoke earlier about the flexibility on the sales tax thing too. And just to remind you that a $0.25 on the sales tax brings in about $8 million. So if we were to get that passed, that would bring reoccurring $8 million, not a one-time, but reoccurring $8 million every year that would come into the county. So that was huge.
Susan, one thing that occurred to me as we've talked about sales taxes and we've talked about the refunds and the challenges that creates budgeting-wise, and of course, we mentioned the hospital numerous times because that's a big piece of it. It sort of comes across negatively, but it's not really. I mean, it is a very positive thing that we have that level of activity and we have such a growing healthcare institution in Cabarrus County. It just presents budgeting issues. So I say that just for benefit of the public so that they don't think we look at that as a negative, because we don't. We're very, very fortunate to have that level of activity going on in Cabarrus County.
Yes. Did not want to shed a bad light on that. We appreciate our hospitals being, because some counties don't have that. The hospitals are closing and things, so we're very fortunate too. Other sales tax questions?
Like in the past, Susan went over property tax and sales tax. I'll go over just our major fees. So for Register of Deeds, like I said, we're expected to come in around 7.6% over budget this year. So for estimating out for FY '20, we're estimating an 8% growth rate, which would result in an additional $220,000, which you're able to see under the permits and fees column. Again, for building inspections, just based on what we're seeing right now, we are right now projecting to keep that budget flat, just because we're under where we should be at this point in the fiscal year with inspections. Myself and the assistant finance director work closely with our department heads, and so just like Susan's constantly reviewing property tax and sales tax, I work with our department heads in reviewing their major fees. We'll see if, after we kind of get into the spring months and maybe past some of the rain, if stuff starts to kind of pick back up, we can always revise our projections throughout the budget process. And we did kind of want to keep building inspections flat too at this point, because it is contingent on the new fee study. So I believe that should be finished around July 1.
Yeah, we'll actually present it to you before then. So we are, by statute, we're required, we can't make a profit in building inspections, so we've been reassessing our fees based on the time it takes to do each inspection. So we'll be coming back to you and presenting, it's kind of a whole new system, so we're having that presented to you, and then you're going to have some decisions to make that we'll pose. And I think we discussed that when we first brought it up, that it may cost us X to do all these inspections on this particular job, but you're going to probably want to just do some percentage of that. And we'll go through all that, and then it has to be incorporated into our inspection software also, and tested and everything to get it ready for July 1st.
Jonathan, in relation to that question that you just discussed there, we increased the permitting fees and all of that several years ago because we had a substantial loss to the county to do a complete set of inspections, as you just mentioned. By having the increase in permits, have we greatly or a little bit lowered the cost to the county? Or are we still running, I think there at one time, I'm just going on memory, this has been 4 or 5 years ago, that to do a complete set of inspections, that it would cost the county somewhere around $700 over and above what the fees were paid. So we had an increase to hopefully reduce that. And I just want to know, has that been effective, or are we still running $700 behind?
It almost depends on the inspection. So there are, and again, the state is constantly coming back to us and saying, for instance, on a residential inspection, you should only be hitting it this many times, not, you shouldn't be out there 10 times, you should only be out there 5 times. And so what we've done is we've gone back through from our frontline staff all the way up to our supervisors there and then to Kelly Sifford and said, how long does it take to do this type of inspection and that? So if you have a single-family house, how long does it take to do a footing and foundation? How long does it take to do a framing inspection on average? And then we've assessed, we have an hourly rate that we've assigned to that, and that's what you'll see is we've gone through all that and that's what we had done in the past, but we're reassessing all that for you as part of this fee schedule study.
And then with our ambulance fees, we are estimating a 4.5% growth rate for FY20 at this point, which would result in an additional $266,000. So again, you're seeing that show up in the permits and fees category in our continuation budget at this point. So kind of changing gears and moving into our expenditures, we typically always present at this point what our projections are for the COLA, a cost of living adjustment, and also our merit. So as you know, for the COLA, we base that on the CPI index for the previous calendar year. So it came in at 1.9%, and just following in line with our personnel policy, we adjust that down to the nearest 0.5%. So Lauren and myself actually did the analysis of the COLA and the merit this year. So we based the COLA on 1.5%, which would cost to implement in the general fund around $1.5 million. So again, if we're kind of now going into the bottom half of the 5-year plan, working on towards our expenditures. So you'll see the 1.5 sitting out there in continuation for the cost of implementing the COLA. And like I alluded to, so the merit, so employees have an annual performance review just based on their start date or their anniversary date. And so what I do is I work with our HR department in getting a good idea of how many employees have had their merit so far at this point in the fiscal year, which equated to around 518 employees, which resulted in a merit average of a little over 2%. So I based it off 2%. Our merit goes up to 2.5%. So knowing that some employees will score lower than that or higher, we felt comfortable budgeting it at 2%. So the cost to implement the merit fully we're projecting would be around $1.3 million. But again, remember last year, we didn't set really any money aside for merits, just proposing to adjust that with lap salary. But this year I am showing $500,000 in there to budget for merit, knowing that if we close that gap with lap salary, then you're not going to have as much to rely on. So I think conservative budgeting is budgeting some for the merit, knowing that if we do kind of clear that gap, then you're not going to have as much. So we do have the merit budgeted in there in our continuation budget at $500,000. So healthcare, I believe Joanna Ray, our health and wellness manager, is going to come and present in March about the proposed changes to the healthcare plan. But I did just kind of want to go over some highlights at this point because we do know of some. So we have 2 different plans: the HSA, the health savings account, and then the OAP, which is our open access plan. So what we're seeing right now is that our health insurance is projected to increase around 2%, which would result in a per employee contribution from the employer it would increase by $10, so it would go from $655 a month to $665 a month, which would equate to around $189,000. I know Joanna works with our broker and Pam in finance to estimate these rates at the start of the budget year. Joanna is also going to talk in greater detail about changes to the open access plan. So that plan does run higher for us to administer. As you can see right there, the claims run 50% higher than the HSA. So when she comes to present, she will present on some proposed changes, and I know that they've already met with employees on that plan to go over those proposed changes at this point in the fiscal year. So you're going to see an increase of around $500 for the individual and family deductible, and also some of the copays to the pharmaceuticals will increase just to help cover the cost of that plan. But overall, the premiums will remain the same in both.
When she comes, can you just make sure she lets us know how many we have employees are on each of the plans, and if they're individual or family, so we can get some idea of what usage is
Sure.
for each of the two plans. And
We can get those percentages for you.
you don't need to do
And
it till
all
she
new
presents,
employees-
but you know what I mean.
Yeah, all new employees will go, they go straight to the HSA now. It's just the ones, existing employees. So, but those percentages are fluctuate, because we do allow you to go back and forth.
I presume everybody's watching what the state treasurer is doing and his conversations about the state health plan and reimbursements and everything else. I mean, we're obviously
Yep.
self-insured, but there could be some changes on the horizon depending on what gets accomplished. That's the only way I know how to say it. So.
Sure.
But there are a lot of conversations, that's for sure.
And so just following along with the 5-year plan, you will see that $189,000 in the continuation level. So moving on to schools, I will say that a number of us are currently participating in Cabarrus County Schools budget committee meetings. And we've already had, I believe, 3, and we've attended 2 of them because the first one I think was more introductory level. And we've gone over capital and deferred maintenance. So what we're projecting for current expense increases for the schools is really just based on the information that we have last year. I actually believe we're supposed to go over their continuation budget increases next week at the school budget meeting. So again, I will say that these are very preliminary estimates just based on what we budgeted last year at this time. So you will see, it's actually on the back page, I believe, of the 5-year plan at the very top, the increase in current expense funding. And so the little over $4 million is just a projection for retirement increases, hospitalization for local staff, maintaining the supplement for those existing positions at 8%. So again, this is not including really anything new. It's just their continuation budget we're projecting just to keep things, at current level. And we have received RCCC's current expense funding request for FY 20 at this time, and so they are asking for an increase of $472,000, which the majority of that is going to cover the 12 months of the operations at the Advanced Technology Center. And then obviously energy and commodity inflations, which we take into account in our continuation budget as well. So you will see both of those items highlighted on the 5-year plan on the back page. So this just is a high-level overview slide of mainly what I've gone over with our expenditures, but just to hit a few highlights. So again, the COLA, we're projecting at 1.5%, which would be around $1.5 million. The health insurance cost, which I've already gone over. The retirement rate, we did see a pretty substantial increase this year from 1.2%, and they are projecting that out for the next few years. So that would result in the retirement rate for general employees to go to 8.95%, and for law enforcement to 9.7%. So including that in our continuation budget adds around $650,000 of an increase. Continuing with the salary studies that we do every 3 years, this year the general government category is up in the salary study, so we are estimating that around $325,000. The merits we've already gone over, so based on a 2% average, we're showing around $500,000 budgeted for that, with anything over that being adjusted with potential lapse salary. Our workers' compensation rates remained stable. You will see a slight increase on the 5-year plan right below the retirement rate of $73,000. Really, that's just the growing employee base that we had new employees come on last year, and then employees are making more, so it's just a percentage of their salary, but no rate increases there proposed for this year. You also see the departmental continuation budgets. It's feeding in. I have highlighted a few kind of projects towards the bottom of the 5-year plan in this section. Obviously, Midland Library will be fully operating by FY20. I believe it opens next week. So you're going to see more operational cost in this year's budget just due to that. Building and grounds maintenance projects is showing an increase, and like I talked about, this is kind of a harder area to get a true operating budget for, because those projects are going to change year over year, and as we add new facilities and new square footage, and as our existing infrastructure is getting older, you're going to see that budget increase. So it's really just the cost of doing business for our building and grounds maintenance projects. Trying to think if I want to point out any other expenses here.
While you're thinking, I'll talk about the retirement system. The retirement system is actually doing very well. We're still the top three in the country. However, they see the bubble coming through of retirees and the age, so the revenues are not projected to be in line with what they think is going to be the expenses. So the state treasurer has recommended or requiring the local governments to contribute to balance that out. And instead of doing it in one lump sum, the County Managers Association, City County Managers Association has lobbied to be able to do it over a 3-year period. So this is the first of 3 installments, but that is to keep us in line so that it is still performing at a high level. One good thing about this retirement system is the local governments have been willing to keep it current, not so much on the state side. And that's why our retirement system is performing at a little higher level than the states. So.
Are they equal installments for the 3 years?
It's proposed, yeah.
That's what, yeah, we
1.2.
hope so. Yeah, depending on what happens over each year, but it should be somewhere in that general area.
So I will just make a note too. So when we start the budget process and the budget projection, so where the departments are actually entering their budget, I pull essentially a copy of payroll at a point in time. So I pulled it in January, but I consistently make updates to payroll to reflect any performance reviews that have taken place throughout the year, any promotions, demotions if we have them. So the reason in doing that is, with the budget process spanning over multiple months, you want to start FY20 as current as possible with what's actually hitting payroll at this point in time. So I do make those updates throughout the process, and I typically present them at the budget workshop when I have that massive spreadsheet of final changes. There's always a payroll update or changes line. So if you ever see that, that's just me keeping current with what's hitting payroll at this point for our employee base. And then you'll see capital outlay to the school systems. This is typical capital outlay we give CCS and KCS, and then the $100,000 for RCCC, which is added, all showing up in continuation level at this time. So before I get into expansion, if you do kind of follow that continuation budget all the way down to the back page, you can see that based on revenues over expenditures, we are showing a slight shortage of around 211,000. But again, I do want to note that we haven't met with our departments to go through their continuation or expansion budgets at this time. So, you know, there's still some adjustments that'll take place, further discussions that'll take place. But it is including some of those increases in our revenues and our expenditures that I just went over. So it's not necessarily keeping things flat. So I will briefly kind of go, oh, sure.
6.8 is the increase that's under other. Did you say what that was, or did I miss it?
So really, that's just what's in our financial system right now. It's just substantial increases in each budget. I tried to kind of pick out any major increases to showcase. Really, that's just any budget kind of going, having a slight increase, right? So expansion. So again, that's anything new that we're seeing related to this year's budget. So typically at this point in the past, we don't normally have any position requests to present to you because the departments normally submit them in February, which I backed up kind of some of the due dates so we could have a better idea of how FY20 budget is shaping out. So right now we are showing 49 position requests, which total around 2.9 million, and that's salary and benefits. So I'll just briefly kind of go over the highlights. I know we'll have further meetings, and staff will also kind of further vet position request as well, but I did just want to kind of present them to you so you know what areas that they're coming from. So our IT department is requesting 4 positions, really kind of hitting at 2 major areas, physical security and then cybersecurity. And they're also asking for a training coordinator, which will help implement and train employees just based on new software and new processes that we've implemented in the past. Our IAMS department, infrastructure and asset management, is requesting 2 positions, just mainly based on to help with the supervision ratio and with direct reports in one department, and then workload and volume. Our sheriff's department is requesting 6 positions, 3 of which I believe you already pre-approved at your last board meeting. So that's for the governmental security division, which includes 2 deputies and a sergeant. And then they're also requesting a training specialist, a sergeant to assist with their youth development area, their SROs, school resource officers, and then a part-time kennel tech. Construction standards is requesting 1 position. This is really a business systems analyst that would be skilled to work with our central permitting software, Acela. So just really to have someone on staff who is an expert in that program and to assist with central permitting. Fire services is requesting 6 positions. So that is 5 firefighters, 5 firefighters and 1 captain, and that's the proposal to go to the 24-hour shift, which I believe they are actually coming to present in March. Our EMS department is requesting 8 positions, so that includes 4 paramedics, 4 master paramedics, and this request is based on the Concord Fire Station, which will open in the spring months to staff that with EMS personnel. This station is set to start in the spring, so we would look at maybe staggering the cost of that, not budgeting a full year's worth of salary and benefits, since that station is not set to open until later this year.
This is a co-location like we've done in the past. It's just, you funded this, but the construction part of it several years ago. It's just taken Concord a couple of years to get it through the planning stage and then the design stage. So it should be, we're projecting it to come online
Next spring.
next spring.
And what's the location of that
So
facility?
this is, they actually have a temporary what they call a temporary station there at Poplar Tent and Harris Road near that Harris Teeter. This will replace it with a permanent station, and it's also larger, so it allows them to upgrade the equipment there and the number of staff there. And then, of course, we'll have a co-location with them. We've been on Pitt School Road closer to 29. This is really based on where we're getting our calls from, a better location for us. A lot of, I guess our primary will shift out to this Harris Road, Poplar Tent area.
Next is erosion control. So I believe the last time we had this department was around 2010, and we're seeking to reestablish this program with some support from the municipalities. So what those 3 positions would entail is an erosion control manager and then 2 inspectors.
Yeah, we're working with the cities now to maybe provide some assistance on startup. And then if we go forward with recommending to implement this program again, we would hope that it would be self-supporting through fees and permit fees. So we're working with the state now. And the reason for this is we've got so many projects, and they run through the state office in Mooresville, which is a 16 county, is that right?
It's a number of counties in there, and really, truly, they're having trouble keeping this program staffed.
Backing up, and that's why we started it several years back, and it was working very well, but when we had to eliminate some positions and departments to balance the budget, that was the one that was one of the departments that went away. However, the volume has not decreased since then. It's still increasing. So what this means, if you're not familiar with the construction industry, you got to go through the permitting process, and most of it is the civil design of the sites. And with the state and their limited amount of staff and the volume that's coming through, sometimes that could be several weeks or several months to get through that permitting process. And that is one of the initial stages of the permitting process, so it holds up the entire project. So we're trying to look at helping move that process along, but only if we can do it by breaking even or very close to breaking even. So we've met with the state. They're in support. We weren't quite sure they were going to let us come back into the game, but they are somewhat excited that we are even contemplating this now. So we're still going through that part of the process, but we're also working with the cities to see if there is continued interest from them as well for us to do that. So it'll be just like building inspection. We would work throughout the entire county, inside the city limits, as well as the unincorporated areas.
Couple comments on that. I think when we met with developers and builders several years ago, it was very clear message that we got from them was speed up the process. And if we have to pay more to speed up the process, we're willing to do that. But that was the most important part. So it sounds like that addressed that. And the question I had, would that have assisted some of these residents down on 601 with the issue that we're dealing with down there where the property has been cleared? Would that have come into play to help prevent the problems that we're now trying to deal with?
I think initially it would have helped us get to it much quicker. Ultimately, and this gets back to the ordinance we'll need to adopt. The state has a model ordinance, and we can make some changes to that, but a lot of that is dictated by state rules. So ultimately, that was determined to be going into an agricultural or pasture use, and it exempted it from that land quality section.
Okay.
And so we'll be in the same boat. But there's a water quality part to that we would have some ability to address.
Yeah.
So with erosion control and also moving down to human services, there will be some revenues, and obviously in our human services department, reimbursements tied to their positions. So I do show additional or proposed revenue in the top revenue section of the 5-year plan, and that third expansion column, it's around $730,000. Again, that's a preliminary estimate based on reimbursement revenue for our DHS positions and also proposed municipality support for erosion control. So with that, Human Services is requesting 14 new positions. Just a lot of it is tied to an increase in volume and demand. We see that consistently year over year. It depends on the type of program and work that they're doing for the amount of reimbursement that we can claim on a lot of these positions. The majority in this year's budget, are up to 50% reimbursable. But if you're dealing with Medicaid eligibility cases, we can claim up to 75% of that salary for reimbursement. So whereas I'm showing the expenses in the expansion column, I'm also showing the applicable revenues as well.
Was that what the presentation that Karen did at the summit?
It is.
Okay.
And so Active Living and Parks is requesting 4 positions, and then Library is requesting 1. So again, that total is a 49 position count, which totals around $2.9 million in salary and benefits. But just noting that there is potential revenue and reimbursement back on many of those positions in DHS. Just to kind of highlight, so again, I'm now in this expansion column. I'm in the expenditure area. I'm showing some of the other cost for these positions, so obviously to staff them salary and benefit-wise, but also if they include any vehicles associated, any new technology request, a workspace, that is coming in around $600,000. I am showing our other outside agency request at this time. We've gotten a few back. So they are proposing some increases in their contribution. So that is also shown on the 5-year plan. And then probably one of the biggest expansion items to note is moving down towards the bottom of the page, which you'll see a $1.4 million sitting out there. So that is for a debt payment if we were to issue debt for a land purchase for a middle and high school and library and senior center. That $1.4 million debt service payment is based on an $8.5 million debt issuance at 7 years, which all of that's noted at the bottom of the page there. So we are showing that as an expansion request item at this time.
And the reason for that is we've got the large debt coming on for the new schools. If we want to go ahead and purchase the land up front, we're not looking to go through the more in-depth process. We're looking to do just an installment purchase through a local bank, to go and get those online so that we can have them. Not that we're ready to build yet or not, but we need to get that property, especially on the western side of the county.
Kristen, I have a question. Back
Sure.
up a little bit on the position expansion. 49, is that the vetted number? And is that typical for an annual position increase?
It is typical, I guess, at the start of the process, but it's not a fully vetted number at this time. We've had very preliminary personnel meetings, but we still have to meet with the individual department heads seeking those new position requests. So that's not the final number at this time. And they're still entering their expansion items, so I pulled just what was entered in our financial software system as of yesterday. So that's what that $3.3 million is that I'm showing. But again, I haven't even looked really into detail of what is making up that figure, since it is kind of still a work in progress. So we'll have, I guess, better figures, and as we go along the process of vetting position request and those expansion items. And I do also want to note, too, that we are not showing any expansion request at this time for our school systems, just because we don't have that data yet. So that's still obviously a work in progress as well. So really what I'm showing on the 5-year plan is for expansion is really what we know at this time.
So you're correct, it is not a vetted.
Right.
It's not a vetted list, and that is pretty typical year in and year out. Some years it's less, some years it's more. But again, we want the departments to give us what they think their needs are, and then we'll take those needs and adjust them to what the available cash or the available revenues are and adjust accordingly. So we'll prioritize.
Well, that's good. And, I'm just one, and I'm just one of many. And the comments that always come to me, is why do we keep growing government? I mean, with the county like Cabarrus, we're a growing county, and when you've got a growing county, you've got growing expense to operate the county.
Sure.
But when we're up to 1,100 employees now, somewhere thereabout.
Close to 1,200.
Close to 1,200. And then you know, when you take a number which is unvetted at 49 new positions, you're growing government at a pretty fast pace. Is that faster than the economy is growing, or is it comparable to the economy? And that'll be something you guys will have to determine during the vetting process.
Sure, yeah, and believe me, we take those requests seriously. And some of those are mandated programs where the volume has picked up and we can't keep up with the current staff level. So we will move those along a little bit quicker than some of the ones that are not mandated. But then again, if they're supporting all of the departments and it's holding back the ability for our departments to, such as IT or such as some of the others that, IMES that support county operations continuing to move forward and meeting the demand, they will have a higher priority as well. But we go through it pretty stringently. And we meet with the department heads, and some of them are happy at the end, and some of them are not so happy because they get pushed out. But at least it's, they've had the opportunity to present their case and defend it. But then we've got to go through ultimately and submit a budget to you that we feel comfortable with, that's meeting as much of the demand as we can, but still stay within a reasonable budget for you to consider.
I think we all hear those questions from time to time. And I'm looking at a picture that I made of one of the slides that we looked at last night that showed in 1970, population of Cabarrus County, 74,000 people, and today, 210,000 people, almost exactly triple the number. So the services that we provide certainly are reflected in the larger number of people we're serving also. And I think most people don't really realize that. You know, if you live here for a long time, and I mean, even I look back at night and I say, wow, it's increased that much since 1970, but it does make a difference.
Well, one of the big telltales that I think everybody in this room and whoever's watching this will agree, the traffic situation will definitely let you know that things are different in Cabarrus County than they were just a few years ago. And with that, growing pains comes the extra expense, which puts more burden on the tax, for us to better utilize the tax dollars that we have to work with. And that's why that we're always trying to look for new revenue streams, such as the flexibility sales tax, such as if the state can do a statewide school construction bond, that will help us with things that we're currently paying out of our current budget. And so if with those things, you know, we could really do a lot more. But without them, though, we have to just continue like we have. And so, but, you know, I just, you know, think that we're doing a very good job so far, you know, and I know that I think Pam has made mention that you were in a seminar recently and you talked with some of the people there and compared to other counties, we're way far ahead of other counties. And we're not really necessarily a dream county, but I promise you, we're a lot better than a lot of the others are.
Yeah, and as Kristen's gone through this whole process now that she's kind of wrapped up the expansion versus continuation, when I was at the GFOA Best Practices Committee meeting in January, they were talking about starting a new process of breaking continuation and expansion apart. And I said,
what is GFOA?
GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association, and thank you for reminding me of my little acronym world. But I was so proud to sit at that table and say, well, that's awesome, because Cabarrus County just started that process. And so it was exciting to be able to state that, to say that, you know, we have moved forward into that direction. There was a lot of conversations about transparency, and we've moved forward into those conversations. So kudos to the Budget Division for taking that step across the ledge. And from my perspective of all the years I've worked for the county, it's a really nice way to see that data broken apart and to have that perspective between the two different areas to kind of see what it is to survive
and continuation and what the difference is in expansion. And now the fun part will be marrying the two, so.
Exactly.
But I'm sure Kristen will have it, and Lauren will have that under control.
I do want to note too, and I've added it after I submitted my PowerPoint presentation, that in the expansion revenue part, it is showing if we were to budget sales tax a little more aggressively from 1% to 2%, what that would equate to in additional revenue. So that is in the third column at the top of the page, that $478,000 you're seeing there. So that's, again, further discussions to take place. But as we're, I guess, vetting position request and a lot of the major expenditures, we are also revisiting all of our revenue projections to see if, we can potentially still be conservative, but maybe a little more aggressive in a way with our sales tax projections.
Are we going to talk about future years and debt coming on?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to interject based on Pam's comments. That whole transparency piece is something that really provides a great deal of comfort for me when we're questioned by the public. And we can say, well, the entire, you mentioned that 400-page book, but that every bit of that information is available online for anybody to look at any time. And occasionally they may come back and say, well, I don't totally understand all that, to which I reply, well, I don't always understand all of it either. And I ask a lot of questions, and so can they, if they want to. But I think that, when you say to someone, well, you may not understand it, then that creates some question in their mind. And so I really appreciate the fact that it is all out there and available.
Sure. So really just kind of in wrapping up with the 5-year plan and kind of following that expansion column down, just like we did with continuation, if you flip to the back of the page, you can see that revenues over expenditures at this point, based on that expansion budget, would put us, $8.5 million in the hole. But again, we are still very early in the process. But it does kind of show you if we, like Pam said, did keep things currently where they are, we'd be around $211,000 short. And then with all of those expansion requests, adding an additional $8 million to that. So kind of how I broke it out too on the 5-year plan is I showed, so the whole purpose of the 5-year plan is to kind of show you what we know at this point in the fiscal year and what we can prepare for FY20, but also how the decisions we make in FY20 impact those future years going out. So I'm kind of showing it two different ways. This top area where you're showing total expenditures and revenues less your expenditures, that top portion's based on continuation. So if we only kept things with what we have in the continuation budget and feeding that in our outer years, you can see the deficit at this point.
Do you know where she's looking at? Okay.
And then that second portion is showing the same data, but it's basing it off that expansion number. So if you were to fund everything with the expansion, obviously you can see the growing totals at the bottom there. But I know we'll have kind of further discussion on debt. That's including our debt service payment hitting for the courthouse in FY20, which is an additional $8.3 million that we're projecting. So, this is a planning purpose, and it kind of helps serve a greater purpose of further discussion. But we just kind of want to give you different scenarios so you could see if we just kind of kept things at this point, the impact it would have on future years. And then if we were to include some of those expansion requests, the impact that it too could have once you have more debt service coming on. So really at this point, I think I'm done talking.
You go 5 years out on your debt. You got courthouse debt coming on for 20 years, and then you've got projected school debt.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that?
Yes, the construction of the middle school.
It's hitting FY '22, 4.1 million.
And then you also have the courthouse renovation, which will hit in '23 proposed. And then, of course, going the years out, it's showing the increase or decrease in additional debt payments. And so as new schools come online as well, I do want to note that additional current expense funding would also follow suit. So we're showing that in the school portion, and those are still preliminary estimates at this time, but just for planning purposes, we try to account for everything we know of at this time so you can see kind of the impact that it has on those outer years as well. So are there any questions on the 5-year plan?
The 8,308,000 that says additional current expense funding, high school, elementary school, and middle school. Does that include the debt to build the school?
No, the debt's going to be on the front page.
Because I don't think it's going to cost us $8 million to open the high school and the elementary school. I think that's around $4 million.
And then also the middle school is feeding into that current expense?
It wouldn't open in 2021.
Okay, so we might need to revise those.
Yeah, I think you might want to double check that number.
Point that out for everybody. Where are you at?
I'm on revaluation year 2021 backside, and it says additional current expense funding, high school and elementary school. 8,308,000. I'm thinking the high school was 3 million something-ish, and then elementary school, I think it was around a little over 4 million plus-ish. I think that 8.3 is the combination of the regular current expense plus the
Okay, so
opening
the
of
4.
two schools,
Yeah, and we can revisit those.
which is a good thing.
True.
Makes it smaller.
And in 2021 is also when reval hits. I did forget to mention that. Susan has that projected at 10% growth, hitting in FY '21, which is that 14 million. Any other questions?
Great.
I think this is the last one. So I guess really at this point, we typically, just for planning purposes, like to get some guidance on the cost of living and merits from the board, so we can kind of plan for that. Again, that is showing currently in your continuation or in the continuation budget. And then if we wanted to talk about debt and any future projects. So any feedback?
Based on personnel policies, these are in the personnel policy to move forward, so unless you would like to remove them, then we will proceed as policy states.
It would seem to me that there's no compelling, if we had some sort of financial crisis or a recession, then we might need to revisit that, but I don't see that. I'm sorry, Liz.
You're fine. No, I like that you've got some money in there for the merit that was not in there this year, going forward, because if you're tightening up on lap salary, then you have to have a plan in place so that we don't get hit further
Sure.
down the road. So I think you've made a compelling argument for how you're addressing cost of living and merit. For the debt, everybody knows that there's only so much land and the price keeps going up, so 7 years is, if we don't have the cash to pay for it, 7 years isn't bad. I presume that there would be no prepayment penalty on that, so that as we, if we were to do that and at the end of the year when money's available for capital projects, that debt could be paid down sooner and not necessarily go out the whole 7 years. So, because typically would not, you want to make sure, I think when we do bonds and stuff, there are prepayment penalties because of the nature of the bond instrument, but doing a local financing, there shouldn't be any problem with that going forward. And same thing. We've been talking about the library and senior center in that part of the county for what seems like a long time. And at some point, just like with the courthouse, at some point, we have to say, the time is coming, we're going to make this decision and we're going to go forward with it. So I think the library senior center project in that part of the county, we're getting to the time where we've at least got to identify the property and start programming to plan for that. So I think my advice would be that you're doing a very good job of projecting these things out, and that we need to find a way to make those things happen that you have already identified. So,
I do want to address the land purchase. When we do, even if the small borrowing, which will be 8.5 million, we will need to use part of that property, if not two pieces of property, for the collateral. So it does get a little tricky, because if we, just to say, for example, if we use the middle school as our collateral, when it comes time to build the middle school, then we'll need to roll that debt into the bigger debt so we can use that as collateral again. So I've been in contact with our bond attorney, so to make all that work out right. So if we do want to go ahead and move forward on this debt, then we'll each month I have to come to you for a certain process, or we have to pass this resolution, then we'll have to go back and do another resolution. So we would need to get started on that. That's something, the direction you want to take. So I guess that's why we have it on here today, to advise us on the debt for the properties.
I just wanted to comment a little bit about the merit and the board policy. You know, Cabarrus County is very fortunate to have some of the best people in the world right here in Cabarrus County. And we live in a competitive county as well, with the other locales competing for our employees. And I'm a firm believer, through my own experience, it's a whole lot better to retain people, especially the good people. And when it comes to the benefits, the COLA, merit, things like that, that puts us in a more competitive edge for our neighboring counties. And we can keep our good people and keep them from going to those other counties. And it works the same like in the sheriff's office over there with, the sheriff. We don't want to be losing our people to other counties. And so by keeping the benefits up, then that this gives us a much more competitive edge. And so I'm certainly 100% for leaving the merit board policy just like it is in COLA.
I'll add to what you're saying. I recently went through an experience last week in Chapel Hill at a conference with the School of Government, and there were both municipalities and counties of all different levels represented there. One thing that stood out to me is I heard a number of them talking about the extreme difficulty that they were having retaining employees, and then when and of course there was a great size disparity amongst these groups. Some were very, very small. Others, I would say we were probably among the larger ones. But when they talked about what they could afford to pay in salaries, then you could see a direct correlation between the problems that they were having. So for us to address that in a realistic fashion and do the things that we need to do to retain good people, I think saves us money in the long run. One of the other things that we talked about there was, how much do we give folks the proper amount of credit that they deserve, and in evaluating myself, I'm very quick to tell citizens out in the community to brag about our staff and talk about what a wonderful job they do and how much confidence I have in them and those kind of things. But I don't very often say it directly to them. And so I'm saying that right now. And wish I had said that last night when we had more of our department heads here, but we are extremely fortunate in Cabarrus County. And when you talk with a lot of these county employees, yes, it's a job. Yes, it's how they earn their living, but it is very obvious that they are invested at a level much higher than just collecting a paycheck. So I certainly appreciate that, and I think our our citizens of the county and taxpayers should hear that frequently.
I totally agree with you, Steve. And another thing that the average person out there don't realize is that hiring is very expensive for a business or our county. The same way, I don't know what it costs, but I know whenever I was in business, just 20 years ago, it would take $1,000, $1,500 or more just to fill one position and training. And so, it's a very expensive thing, but if we can hire from within and move up and bring new people in, we're much better off, I think. But we're just fortunate to have a good base to work with and a good succession where we can, continue to move forward. And I think we're doing a great job at that. But hiring is expensive. It's just a whole lot cheaper and a whole lot better to retain, keep good people by providing what we need to give to them.
Well, and I would like to echo what Chairman Morris has said. You said that very well, and it is greatly appreciated. I know 2 years ago when I went home from the first retreat, I thought, oh my goodness, what have I gotten into? When you look at the 5-year plan with a bunch of parentheses next to the numbers, are people going to show up at my house with pitchforks? So, but you guys, you do a tremendous job of doing two things, and that's helping to drive the numbers down in a reasonable fashion of balancing needs and wants, because you can't have, it's competing ideas, but also keeping in mind that ultimately it's the taxpayer that's funding what we're trying to do here. And you have to keep all of that in mind, and you guys have all done a tremendous job of doing that. So it is greatly appreciated, and I have been with Chairman Morris out at some of these, and specifically last year in Nashville at the National Association, and I have heard him talk about how great our staff is. So he's not just saying that because we're sitting here with you guys. So, and it is greatly appreciated. So thank you very much for all your hard work.
Okay, we are done with this section here. We'll take a 5-minute break real quick to refresh ourselves and our drinks, and we'll bring the Cabarrus County schools up and come back. Please come back in 5 minutes because we're 30 minutes behind and Cabarrus has somewhere to go.
I started to say what happened to our
Maybe we
stress
can make
relief.
it
Yeah, we're
up
gonna
at
have
the
to do
end.
stress release after this, maybe, so.